thrilled to have you here today to talk about a wide variety of things, starting with the new CDC prevalence data.
Yeah, amazing. 1 out of every 88 children now in the U.S. Are estimated to have an autism spectrum disorder. That's really, you know, I didn't see that coming. You know,
really?
No, I mean,
that was one of my
of
first questions. Did you see this?
It's got to stop at some point, right? I mean, 1 out of 110 seemed inconceivable, right? And 1 out of 250 seemed inconceivable, you know. And so 1 out of 88, you know, where is it going to end? I don't know.
Well, and of course, as we all looked at it yesterday, it's already old data. It's from 2008.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the last numbers that we had that were 1 out of 110 were taken from data that were collected in 2006, and those numbers were released a few years ago. Now they're releasing numbers from 2008. So there's a 3 to 4 year lag in data collection from the time the data are collected to the time they estimate the prevalence. So yeah, it's really never up to the minute information. It's already 3 or 4 years out of date.
Really takes my breath away, and especially looking at, it seems like the numbers are slightly, it seems like it's more boys, even more.
It looks like it's about 5 to 1 now, yeah, whereas before it was maybe about 4 to 1.
Which I can't imagine is good for either side. I was saying that this morning, you know, for parents who have boys, you're going, oh, okay, the incidence for us goes up, but I can't help but think for people who have girls, it's already, there is a disparity in the services, and, you know, people who have a girl and they want to send the girl to a program, and they find that it's all boys when they get there, and that the subjects tend to be geared towards boys. A difficulty for all of us in the community. What if, as a researcher, what kinds of things come to mind for you as you're looking? Because that was one of the first things that I looked at and went, oh, this is hard for both sides. But what kinds of things do you look at it and take note of? And
well, you know, for me, the number one thing is, again, just wishing that we had some good hard science that would address what some of the possible causes are. You know, I mean, most of you know, as you are well aware, there's 1,000,001 theories about what really causes autism. 99% of them are not based on any real good scientific evidence. Most of those theories are adhered to by folks who are not really connected to the scientific community. But then on the other hand, you have the mainstream scientific community funded by millions of dollars in government-funded research that honestly are hardly scratching the surface and essentially ignoring most of the theories that most people have. So there's a real big disconnect between what you know, what issues people are really concerned about and what issues are being addressed. So you have a lot of research looking at, you know, details that are interesting but maybe are only relevant to maybe 1% of the ASD population, or you have research, you know, what's just sort of a fundamental fact of most traditional, maybe you would call it ivory tower scientific research, that 99% of research doesn't really get at the real issues that really matter and doesn't really end up helping people. Part of that is because science is driven by a need for being conservative and a need for being very careful, not to overstep one's bounds in terms of the claims that you're making. There's a big need to, well, scientists feel a big need to produce research that looks scientific and looks rational and looks reasonable to the scientific community. So the scientific community tends to be very conservative, and I don't mean like liberal versus Republican or Republican versus Democrat. I don't mean like that. I mean conservative in the sense of kind of doing the same thing that's already been done a lot. And that's not just within autism, and that's certainly not just within ABA. That's a general property of science in general. So people complain that science moves really slowly. That's part of scientific culture, is not going out on a limb too far, because you don't want to say something is real when there isn't enough evidence, or you don't want to say one thing causes another when frankly there isn't enough evidence. So unfortunately, in autism research or in autism or in theories about causes of autism, you sort of have a big disconnect between people who are way out there in terms of really there's no evidence for most of what they're saying, and then on the other side is folks who are just really conservative and really sort of barking up the same old alleys, or I'm not sure if that's the metaphor, but you know what I mean, barking up the same tree that hasn't really produced much for the last 20 or 30 years. So we'll see. You know, I really wish I had a crystal ball and I could look forward 10 years from now or 20 years from now and know kind of, oh, that wasn't a very fruitful path for research, or that was, and they missed it, or et cetera. So yeah, you know,
is it fair to ask you, like, what would need to change? Like, can you even know? Because that would take the crystal ball.
Right, yeah. Well, and I must say that, you know, when talking about causes of autism, I'm speaking outside of my area of expertise. My area of expertise is how to make learning happen. So
Right.
I consider myself a behavior doctor or a learning doctor.
Right.
Definitely not a biologist or a physiologist or an epidemiologist or a geneticist or, you know, a gastrointestinal medical doctor or any of those. Frankly, I'm not really sure. But maybe a wider variety of topics, certainly more funding, but a wider variety of topics being investigated, maybe a little bit more money spent on what are called sort of high-risk projects, meaning not high risk to the participants, but high risk in the sense that it might not produce meaningful data, but at least it's investigating something kind of really new and innovative. There's just not a whole lot of that going on in general.
I thought it was interesting that just last month that Autism Speaks put out a call to parents and said, we're looking to fund some research projects. What would you like funded? What research would you like to see done? And everybody, it was sort of one of those things where I felt like the whole community went, huh? Nobody's ever asked us before, for the parents, because we yell and shout and go, why aren't you looking into this, and why aren't you looking into that? So I thought it was a really interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because Autism Speaks is, you know, and you know, they're a great foundation. They collect a lot of money for autism research and really are big supporters of autism research. But at the same time, I do hear that complaint constantly from parents: is why, you know, why are you investigating the same old tired stuff, or why are you looking at that particular detail of that particular detail of that detail? Like, what is that? Is that, like, even if you find exactly what you're looking for, what does that translate into? How is that going to help someone in 5 years? You know, let alone today or tomorrow.
Well, I think the perfect example of that, I got mad last month. They published a study saying that they've proven that smoking while you're pregnant does not have a significant impact and does not cause autism. And I said, really? You wasted somebody's time and money? Nobody should be smoking while they're pregnant. I don't care whether it causes autism or something. You spent money and had people smoking to see if it... Really? Seriously? When there are things that need... I got a little... upset about that.
So I think on the one hand, it's great that Autism Speaks is asking for that input. On the other hand, it'll be interesting to see next year what actually gets funded, right? So every year they ask for proposals for funding for research, and we'll see what gets funded. And most of what gets funded, not just by Autism Speaks, but by the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Education, most of it is not treatment. It's not research that actually helps people. So, you know, we'll see.
Interesting, a very interesting thing. And in terms of the numbers, you know, what does it mean for somebody who's in the field of behavior that it's 1 in 88? What is the first thing that makes you think?
You know, frankly, it doesn't mean anything. We're already too busy. We already have wait lists. We already are nowhere near being able to meet the demand for services. I mean, even if we trained, even if we multiplied our rate of training by 5 or 10 times, we wouldn't be able to serve all the kids that need services next year or even in 10 years. So it's basically just ups the ante, I guess, but it's already a complete epidemic. It's already a total emergency, nothing short of an emergency. If you're a family of a kid with autism and you live somewhere where there aren't any people, any professionals who are trained in top quality behavior analysis or ABA intervention for your kids, what are you going to do? It's a disaster. And frankly, that's probably the norm still. There's probably the majority of people in the United States, let alone the rest of the world. So I guess it just, you know, sounds the alarm that's already been sounding for decades. Yeah.
There's two things that I want to say based on what you just said and a question that I want to ask. But you brought up, you know, what are you going to do if you're, and I have to say, so if somebody's watching this, CARDI learning is a way that people, and using skills wherever you are, that's a way that you can at least begin that process and do something quality for your children.
Yeah, you can get educated, learn more about what really constitutes effective treatment and evidence-based treatment. And honestly, at that point, you still don't want to do it by yourself. You know, if there's anything you can do to get a top quality trained ABA professional in there with you, it doesn't have to be CARD. There's lots of folks out there, but get them in your home with you, training training your staff, getting in your kid's classroom, training the teacher. It's really going to make the difference.
Absolutely. That's the best case scenario. But if you've got none of that, you do have recourse as a parent through those things. And you brought up the word epidemic. And I have to say that on my chatter, on my parent chatter, on all my social networks, that was a big deal yesterday, because there was one whole group of people who were saying, why isn't the CDC naming this what it is, an epidemic? And arguments about the fact that, you know, the CDC has said, well, it's not an epidemic because strictly an epidemic is something that's contagious, and other people saying, but they've used it for childhood obesity, which is not contagious, so why aren't you using the term epidemic? And then a bunch of people on the other side saying, we don't want it to be called an epidemic. People are going to think it's contagious, but let's call it an emergency. And then arguing, you know how we can all get bogged down in a phrase and a word.
Terminology, yeah, semantics, yeah, that's amazing.
But certainly, at the very least, it's a huge national, worldwide, international emergency.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you even just think of like percentage of the population, think about the number of folks that are going to be living with autism spectrum disorders 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. It's a significant percentage of our workforce. I mean, even if you just thought about just the economic impact, if these folks don't get effective support and treatment, they're not going to be able to, a good percentage of them are not going to be able to hold down employment and meaningful employment for themselves. And that's a major setback for their own development, but also economically, that's a big challenge for us.
Absolutely. You know, Monday is World Autism Awareness Day, and you know, I think on that day we all want to celebrate and let everybody know that we're here and as a community. But I think what these numbers also said was this is not just the autism community's problem, it's everyone's problem.
Absolutely. And you know, frankly,
1 in 54 boys, it's everyone's problem.
It's everybody's problem. And basically right now, I think it's fair to say everyone in the United States has either a family member or a friend or a neighbor who's on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Everybody. They might not know it. You know, some people are still ashamed and they still try to hide it. But everybody is touched by it at this point. And so it's a matter of what are they going to do about it? Are they going to try to take steps towards actually doing something to help?
And we all need to get on the same page.